Welcome back. SuperDad, or no, it's not SuperDad, it's Dad Pod episode 8 now, or something like that. Been some time between this episode and the last, just some space for myself, Christmas, family stuff. But, I have brought on someone that I've wanted on for some time, right? I'm not gonna go too much into it because he doesn't even know why I wanted him on. But I believe it's gonna be one of our best podcasts ever. Andrew Tucker. I do work with Andrew, but that's not the reason why I got him on. Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yep, okay. As you said, Andrew Tucker. Been working with you for just over a year, a bit more, a bit less, not sure. Married, 2 kids, Hannah and Sophie. Been coaching for about 3 years now, but with a particular emphasis on virtue and character, and mostly men, occasionally women, mostly men. Lots of emphasis on leadership and male leadership in particular. But, so that's me.
So modest, this guy. We're gonna delve into this, right? I'm gonna ask you the question that tell me what do you do coaching?
Okay. It's quite interesting. I start off with people quite deliberately. I'm not interested in their goals at that point. Because what I find is with a large chunk of the people that I work with, part of the reason they're attracted to me is this idea of virtue, this idea of building character as opposed to external goals. But you go straight into the externals and they're just not aligned. It's just not, if they've imbibed so much externally about what they should be looking to achieve. And they just don't know themselves. They don't know themselves, and so they don't really know what they're going for. So the first 12 weeks or so, it's entirely focused on who they are. So we get into things like, what's your mission going to be? What are your driving forces? What are the values you have? I do this exercise with them. It's great, actually. It's called, I did it this morning with someone, so it's in my head, a eulogy drill. And I get them in 5 or 6 different areas of their life. So that's adventure, family and legacy, material, financial, all those sorts of things. And we really delve into it. At your funeral, if you were a fly on the wall, what do you want to be hearing people say about you? 1 sentence in each of those areas. And it's fascinating what some of them come out with. Particularly when I say, are you sure about that? It's really interesting, the amount of it's men in particular, actually. Women are quite good at it. I've only worked with a couple of women. But men in particular are really good at kidding themselves about what they've got an image of what they think they should be or what they think they want. And it's usually focused about money and external achievement. There's nothing wrong with either of those things, by the way. But they don't know why. They have no idea why. And
do you know why?
Do I know why?
Yeah,
I'm really clear about it. I've got this really clear mission now.
No, sorry, not
why they want it.
Why? Yeah, why is that? I know.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Do you think there's a reason why us men?
I think it's really easy to generalise. It just is. But I think we've got very confused.
We've been very confused.
We're really confused. We don't know really. I think, and there's lots of reasons for that, which maybe we'll get into. But I think, in essence, with a few exceptions, there's a lot of men out there not quite sure what their role is meant to be, not really sure where they fit anymore. And there's been lots of good things that have happened in the last 30, 40 years. But I think one of the things that has definitely gone backwards is this sense of, where do I fit in the world as a man? And what does that mean for the way I am in life, the way I am with my family, the way I am at church, the way I am anywhere, actually. There's no kind of... And I think, and I've come up with this theory, mainly based on observation and working with people, that the reason things like Marvel films, for example, or gaming, or what have you, have become such a big deal is because there's a lot of men still looking to be kids.
Still looking to be kids.
Still looking to be kids. Haven't really got something to aim at.
Yeah.
And so they've just kind of reverted back to the show. And these are often men who are married and they have kids themselves, but they haven't really got that sense of purpose anymore.
You're going to be attacked here, you know. There's a lot of them like DC and Marvel kind of like.
Oh, yeah. And they're good fun. I've watched them. They're good fun. They're nice. But they shouldn't. We shouldn't be aspiring to be Captain America. And there's too many people who see that as as a thing.
So, So a lot of people, right? And as I said, I don't want to generalize. Like people think there's like an agenda and there's a narrative from like the government or the man or whatever. What do you think that's kind of brought this upon, or do you reckon it's just been a natural progression of where we're going?
It's a good question. I think there's any number of different. I think it's. If I'm honest, I think a lot. Well, I'm going to get slightly sociological now. Yeah. I think in this country, and it's been. I think we have become very individualistic. And there's a certain necessity to some of that. We are all individuals. And I think that has been driven as much, at the risk of getting a little bit political, I think that's been driven as much as the government and others, and generally people now being seen primarily as economic units. And so everything is driven by how do we get everybody contributing economically and nothing else. And what have you. So to give you an example, I think, things like childcare. We now have a position where a family-friendly policy is to provide free childcare so you spend less time with your kids. That can't be right. That's not. I mean, okay, you might argue that, well, it's better for people to do that. It might be better for kids. I don't think it is. I think all the research shows otherwise. Yeah. But the idea that that's family-friendly as opposed to driven by something else, whether it be what the government considers the economic needs of the country or what any individual might prefer to do, is nonsense. It's just, and I think I'm getting away from the question slightly now. Yeah. I think there's a lot of forces at work that have driven that. I think there's, I think to some degree the equality agenda has driven it, and I think there's loads that's good about that. I really do. Yeah. But it's made things very confused, and it's focused so much on one particular aspect that the losers within it have not been able to come back again.
You know what, Mr. Tucker, that's such a strong point, because I like yourself, man, I don't want to say that I know the studies, right, but I definitely speak to enough men to like formulate an opinion. And when I have conversations with men, they like their external goals are not aligned with their values, right? So, for example, and this might trigger a few people, but for example, the effort that we will as a man to go to like put together a holiday, for example, a family holiday, right? What it requires for a trip to Dubai, to Spain, like, there's nothing wrong with it. Actually takes you further away from your family at the source, right? And you said something earlier on about eulogy, right? And like in the moment, obviously, a trip, getting on a plane, going to Dubai and standing at the top of the tallest tower in the world is fantastic, right? But in your eulogy, you'd rather just have a strong family unit, right? You'd rather be able to say that, like, I had a really strong bond. And I think that's really good what you said about your goals don't align with. So tell me, you're Christian, right?
I am, yeah.
Christian, does Christianity tie in with your coaching? Is there like a...
Up to a point, yeah.
So
definitely.
the basis to it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, if you go back into I talked about virtue, and when I talk about it, I really mean the sort of the classical ones from Western philosophy, really. Yeah. So it's, in particular, justice, courage, prudence, and temperance, self-control. And that has a long history of pretty much from the beginning of Christianity. Those were kind of seen as a four to aim for. It's this idea of we might never get there, but the pursuit of virtue is the attempt to be as perfectly human as possible. And the idea that basically comes from the idea that Christ was the perfect human, and therefore we should look to emulate him. So there's definitely that basis there. It's definitely consistent. But the interesting thing is with that, because there's something in Christianity about supernatural virtues, and those are ones which essentially come from God, and you have to be open to it. But it's very difficult to, or nigh on impossible to acquire them with effort and naturally. Whereas these are very much about human will.
Okay.
And everything you can grow and develop massively in them with your own will, in essence. And what that means is that although, yes, there is a basis in Christianity, you don't have to be Christian to find that if you adopt some of these practices, you will thrive. And I don't mean thrive in the external sense, although often that will happen. If you become somebody who is more courageous, more able to ignore criticism when you know you're doing the right thing, you're going to be better in the external world. But actually what happens is that people find that the externals don't matter as much anymore anyway, because they know they're doing the right thing, and they know they're growing, and they know that, I don't know, when your 5-year-old's having a tantrum, they know that actually this is how I respond to it, and I am going to sit here until I need to not be here anymore. Rather than do what I've seen, and I've spoken to people who disagree with me on this, who have said, no, actually, you just leave them. I'm being slightly unfair, but the essence of it is because after a while, why put up with it? Yeah. And my response is because that's the right thing to do. So yeah, there is definitely a basis in Christianity, but it's not limited to. It's not only Christians who benefit.
From that question, right? We're going to go way left field here, right? And is society missing Christianity?
Yes.
Yes,
yeah, absolutely. I think it's amazing. You look at a lot of the tenets that society, human rights, really good example. Women's rights, actually, really good example. Or monogamy. None of those things would have been existent without, in the Western world, without Christianity, but they've become so entrenched that people no longer associate them with the Christian mindset, Christian belief. And I think, and that's why they start to get twisted. And I think so. How far do I go with this?
What I, in my experience, there was a point in my life where I was extremely like getting into it. I was like flirting with faith. Then there was a point where like I turned my back on it, and I was like, as long as I do good, I'll be good, right? And I don't know if it's a thing that happens to you as you get older, right? But I'm seeing like more like of the value of not just Christianity but religion in itself and how powerful it is. And yeah, so that's what I'd like to. You think the like a society needs Christianity, or is better with Christianity?
I'd say both. I think it needs it, and I think it's better with it. I think so. It's interesting what you just said there. Actually, the idea as long as you're a good person.
Yeah.
Now I could go down the sort of philosophical rabbit hole of but what does it mean to be good? But actually, I think the interesting thing there is you determine what's good. I think it's very difficult without faith in something to maintain that, because at some point it's not going to feel good to do what you know is good. And there's only so far with certain things that willpower is going to get you. It needs to be something which you're above you, which you believe in, for it to really kick in. And it's usually, I find, at the moment when you're tested most, that you'll find what you really believe.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to get into detail because there's too many people that are involved.
Yeah.
But there was a couple of years ago where something happened, and every instinct within me wanted to do the thing I didn't really believe, or no, that's not quite true. Instinct wanted to act against the faith I had because it didn't feel good to stick to it.
Say that again, sorry.
So something happened.
Something happened.
And what, in essence, my faith tells me I need to forgive here. I need to forgive, and I need to move on, and I need to continue with where we're at. Yeah. Didn't want to do it. Hated the idea for a good few weeks. But I did, ultimately, and that was faith. That had, I don't want to say it had nothing to do with me, but it wasn't what I would have done without it. And 2 years down the line, I can safely say I'd been in a far worse place if I'd made a different decision.
Okay.
So I think there's a personal level to which society, I would argue, I think every individual needs it, and I'd make a case for Catholicism, but it's a whole different debate. But I think there's also the sense in which the sort of underpinning values which a Christian society at its best, and there's been bad ones, but at its best should have, which we lack a lot of today. And just going back to what I said earlier about individualism, I think it's only so far that can go before it becomes negative. And I think our society it's fascinating to me the way in which doing good and getting filmed doing it and posting it on social media has become a thing. And I look at it and I just kind of go, it's probably a microcosm of everything that's gone wrong, is that we are now monetizing what is meant to be a charitable act. And it's almost the antithesis of those values.
Do you... Well, you know what, I can't disagree with you, right? Although I can sit here and say I'm not a Christian, right? When my relationship with the Bible, reading it, and also reading many other books, like when I always kind of at the core of it, I always feel as though like the message is right, message is right. So there's a book here by Viktor Frankl, Man in Search of Meaning.
And that's a great book.
Yeah.
Brilliant book.
A lot of what you said there, kind of, like, it's like meaning, isn't it? Like, it's very hard to stay if there's not meaning.
There's a great, he tells in that book, he talks about, they were few and far between, but and it was men actually, he said, but there were a few women, but mainly men, when they were in the concentration camps, who would go around and give up their food for others if they could see that someone was hungry, despite the fact they had basically none anyway, and would always be the ones trying to help everybody else in the camp despite the massive hardship. And he said what they had recognised was that one thing the Nazis couldn't take for them was the meaning that they gave to their life. And that's brilliant. It's ultimately that's the one thing that no one can ever take, is the meaning you put to something.
For me, that means a lot. Like, you know, people that see me on social media probably know I'm an emotional person. When I hear stuff like that, it makes me feel like, I feel like when I don't have a meaning, like purpose, and sometimes I have to like kind of create it, right? Like I feel lost, extremely lost. And I think that's when I'm always like on the verge of fucking up, you know, or doing something, right? But for me, that's an emotional thing. There's even part of the book, I don't know if you obviously read it, if you remember this bit where they said a guy, he had a premonition about when the war would end, right? And he was the jolliest person in the camp, right? And people, he'd give up his food. And they said that when the moment the day passed and the war had an end, right, he lost his meaning. And they said within 3 months he was dead. You know? So just like something like that. When I proper tie into the fact that like, when a man that has a purpose is capable of anything, you know?
Absolutely. It's one of the things, I mean, I spoke earlier briefly about mission in the coaching, and it's something I got from... So I got involved with something called the Virtuous Leadership Institute years ago. I was looking for something leadership-wise, because stuff at work, my responsibilities had doubled, pretty much everything had doubled overnight except the pay, obviously.
Typical.
Yeah. And I basically thought I need to stop messing about with this, and just did some research and came across this thing. But one of the things that the Institute talks about a lot, and I do with everybody I work with now, is this idea of mission. And it's this idea that each of us has this unique mission on Earth, and our task is to find it out and then deliver it. And so mine, and it took me a few years to work it out, it went through a few iterations, but has now become transforming society through virtue. And the beauty of that is I can do it anywhere, for one thing. There might be ways I can do it better in some places than others. But that kind of, by having that there, and it's always there at the kind of back or forefront of my mind at any given moment, means that exactly what you were just talking about, that idea that you, and I think it's particularly, I don't know, I'm not a woman, I think it's particularly true of men, but they need that purpose, they need that thing to latch onto and then chase. And it just provides it, and I've seen it with people over and over again. They latch onto it, and once they get it, and if they believe it and they see it, this is what I'm here to do. That's it. You see transformations really quite quickly sometimes.
You're not gonna, as a Christian man, yeah, forgive me for my choice of words. Forgive me for my choice of words. Right? I've said this to him before, right? I genuinely believe, right, that you should seek what makes your dick hard, right? And take me lightly. Don't go out and trying to get hard, right? But what I mean by this, Andrew, is what makes you feel alive. And it's dangerous, because once you find it, it's like, oh, this is life, you know? And you find it in weird places, you know, and it's seasonal, right? But I 100% agree. I feel like that external, the bit you were talking about originally, right? That's like a just a whiff of actually finding something, you know, that makes you. I need to ask you, what background? Is your parents Christian? Where's this come from?
No, so I right, it's a long story to how I became Catholic, but I'll tell it. I was brought up.
So you're Catholic, sorry, not Christian.
Catholic is Christian.
Catholic.
Well, we'd argue with the original Christians, but others disagree.
Okay. This could be a long one. Yeah.
But I'm not going to get into that. So I grew up, I guess, slightly nominally. My grandparents were missionaries in Madagascar. Okay. Which is why my mum was born. You know, we talked about it earlier, but it's why my mum was born there. And so I was brought up in the United Reformed Church, and it was okay. I guess there's some people I liked, but I also so from about the age of 13, 14, I was getting drunk a lot, and got to the point. It would have been the day after my 20. How old am I now? 45. Day after my 22nd birthday. Having attempted to stop drinking regularly for the last year, I found myself. There's a friend of mine actually. I'd called him, and in floods of tears after this thing at work, drunk, and then 5 minutes later I'd forgotten I'd called him, and ran off into the centre of London again to him. But he came up. He was out in Kent somewhere, and he came up to the centre of London, knowing I was somewhere around Westminster, and just started searching for me. And he found me outside Waterstones in Charing Cross, asleep and dirty and smelly and just horrible. It wasn't the worst night I'd ever had.
Yeah.
There was a lot worse. There was something about that night that just went, right, I've got to stop this now. Anyway, I then started going to AA for a while. Actually, I'd been before, but I started going, and I didn't start drinking. It just felt horrible. Part of the reason I drank was just the way I felt about life if I didn't. And it got worse and worse and worse. And I got to a point where I just couldn't see a point. I didn't want to drink, but I didn't really want to live either. And so I attempted suicide. I think that was my third one. Second or third by that point. But a few weeks before that, someone had said to me, look, the first thing you really need to do if you want to get better is pray. And that's something I wouldn't do. I'd rejected that a long time ago. But having failed at even, suicide, the thing I thought I had some control over, I thought, well, I better give it a go. And the prayer was basically, God, if you're fucking there, help me. Yeah. And I had a really powerful experience with it. And pretty much from that moment on, if I'm honest, felt called to be Catholic. And then ran away from that for about 3 years because I hated the idea.
So you had this prayer.
Yeah.
You felt called to be Catholic.
Yeah.
And then ran away from the idea.
I hated the idea.
That is the most, what? Isn't it like
a
paradox of what's happening here?
So it's partly, I think, I didn't like what I knew of the church's morality. Admittedly, it was pretty skewed, what I thought I knew, but I didn't like it. I kind of rejected the idea of Christianity. And, having prayed and then felt a little bit better, I was like, well, I probably don't need it anymore, do I? But I found myself kind of at that point thinking, well, I need to find something. So I went around kind of searching, and I did an insane amount of research into every belief system and under the sun. Found out
even outside of Christianity.
Oh yeah, all of it. I was just trying to find a reason not to do it.
Yeah, okay.
So yeah, it's all the big ones. I found some really. There's this place up in London that's called the Brahma Kumaris. Right. It's kind of. I thought I'd found the perfect thing for a few weeks because it seemed to be a coalition of just about every one of the big major religions, and then, if I'm honest, they told me that I needed to be celibate, and I didn't like that idea.
What's it called? The bar?
Brahma Kumaris.
Okay.
They're kind of... no, I might be mischaracterising this. It's been a long time. But in essence, they think that thousands of years ago, some people came down to Earth from some celestial place and then forgot that that's where they came from. And the purpose of our life on Earth now is to get back there eventually, and there's reincarnation and lots of meditation and various things.
Sounds like one of them DC movies that
exactly. Yeah, it really does actually. Yeah. In fact, I think there's one called The Celestials out there, isn't there?
Is it? Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, in the best way I can describe it, by the point when I eventually gave in and just went along to a local parish and started finding out more, was when I kind of first had done that prayer. This idea of becoming Catholic was a little bit like a tap on the shoulder, just you might want to go over. by the time I gave in, it was like a sledgehammer being whacked over my head every 20 seconds, just asking me why the hell I wasn't there. And the thing was, even when I joined, when I got baptised and confirmed within the church, even then I had my doubts. But I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to do this. If I still feel like this in a year, I can leave. And the funny thing was, without any effort on my part, about a year later, the doubts had gone. Just completely gone. I didn't have any doubts about what the church taught. I had some issues with some of the behaviour within it, but that's an entirely different thing. In terms of actually what it taught, the doubts had gone. And I guess I'd found my tribe. Is an odd tribe, but it worked.
You know,
and that was about 20 years ago, maybe a bit more than that now, actually.
There's so much, like, obviously I've worked with you. I've never heard you mention suicide before, you know, 3 times, you know. So much to unravel there, you know, and I think I'll pick it up with you another time. But what I am, is that why you help men? Do you help men from that angle, that perspective?
So the interesting, what I found is, particularly those who have drunk a lot as well, is there's an identification there that they don't get if you haven't experienced it. And so I think I am particularly effective at helping men who are either going for it or have had that experience.
The alcohol.
Yeah, either alcohol or suicide or a sort of quite severe depression, which I'm pleased to say has not been an issue for quite some time. But it's not necessarily from that perspective either. If, you know, I think it can put a certain spin on it. And as I said, I think I can be particularly effective with them. But I also think that actually a lot of the reason I drank is the same reason why some people go out there and overeat, or the same reason why some people go out there and spend far too much. Or I think most people, and I think going back to this point about individualism, I think it makes it much worse when people just feel like it's only them. They feel separate, they feel alone even when they've got 100 people around them or within the family. But just this, it seems to be this mass prevalence of feeling separate. It's almost like a hole in the soul. And I think there's so many things that people try to use to fill that up that just kill them, if not literally, mentally and spiritually. And it's that which I think, going back to my point about virtue, I think fixes. And I also think actually people who grow in virtue tend to get closer to God, even if that's not what they're looking for. That's an opinion. I can't prove that.
You know, Andrew, my kids always ask me, they're like, Daddy, do you believe in God? And I'm like, no, yeah. But I don't say no, right? Like, it's like I'm being a bit of a rebel. I say no in the manner that I think that they're asking. And it probably, that's very ignorant now that I'm listening to you, because Andrew, I do believe, like, it's just I probably haven't put enough thought into it. You know, like, just what you're saying and how, like, talking about virtue and, like, direction and stuff, like, it warns me to think that there obviously is something, you know. But we won't go there. We won't go there. I end up being baptized on the show. Andrew, so men. All right, let's get back onto men, right? Yeah. So, Andrew Tucker, you're a Christian virtue coach, right? What is the problem? What's the problem out there? Men like us, fathers. Do you think there's a problem? Do you think there's a common problem? You do. What is that problem? I know you mentioned loss of direction earlier, but is there anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way it presents is different in different circumstances, but I think the underlying problem for men, and it's kind of related to that lack of direction, is just this. There is a real sense in which men either lack or don't know what their responsibility is.
Ooh.
And I'd go as far as to say some are actively trying to get away from it.
Ooh. Andrew is on LinkedIn. Add him if you want to attack him. He said it's not come out of my mouth, but I agree.
Yeah.
So let's delve into that right there. So, is there any clear of when you're working with men, what responsibilities are they running from?
Um,
I'm just gonna throw something in here. I think leadership.
Yeah.
I think leadership, and I know that's vague, and I'm gonna let you take over, but I think leadership, and I think even when men say the word leadership, they mean provide an income and draw a line there. A lot of them draw the line there. It's like, I'm the leader. I'm the alpha. This is, and then I pay bills, but whoa, there's no standard with anything else. But I'll leave you. Sorry.
Yeah.
What?
No, I think that's. I completely agree. I think there's real insight into that. With that, I think, and just the point about income. I think you there is this sense, and if we go back to what the traditional family model where the man provided and the woman stayed at home, but there was always this kind of, certainly looking back, I didn't live through it particularly, but looking back, there's always this sense that the man was always very distant and what have you. And that's not a good thing, I don't think. But I think where it's become problematic today, more so than it was, and there were problems with that. I don't think there's ever been a sort of perfect society, is that focus on provision and nothing else in a world where, going back to your question about does society miss Christianity, in a world where you don't have a moral framework which sets those standards for people, and I don't think we do anymore, or it's certainly got severely warped, is that when a dad or husband focuses on nothing but, right, you've got your money, just leave me alone now, in a way that didn't exist in quite the same way before, because there was no sense in which, there's no sense now often that I have a responsibility to you, whoever you might be in front of me. My first responsibility should be to my family, not my particular desire to, I'm going to be a bit facetious here, but to play, Gaming, I can't think.
He doesn't like you gamers, He doesn't.
No, but no, I'm trying to think of the name of it.
FIFA or something.
Yeah, that'll do. Yeah. And it's fine once in a while, but it's this idea that actually you've got enough materially. I don't need to give you anything else. And I think one of the wonderful things actually about virtue is that it creates example. But it gets men in particular to see the need to show an example. One of the reasons, actually, one of the reasons I am attempting to do this coaching is reflecting on, this is a few years ago, I was thinking, it was my own version of a eulogy drill on myself, actually. I was thinking, when my daughters look at me, what do I want them to see? Do I want them to see someone who's a bit timid, just kind of, I've kind of, and I've provided quite well for you, you've got a decent living, but I'm not really driven to be who I could be. And there was definitely a sense of that. I knew I was mediocre. I'd achieved okay, but I was not doing everything I could. And when I started looking at virtue, and particularly around this sort of courage and justice, because there's something unjust about someone not fulfilling their potential. There's something really unjust. You're here and you're not doing the most you can possibly do with it. That's an injustice. And it's not just an injustice to yourself, it's an injustice to your family, and it's an injustice to the world around you if you're single. You need to be out there doing everything you can possibly do. And if you're not do it. It doesn't mean you're going to achieve everything, and it doesn't mean everything's going to be a massive success. But if you're not doing everything you can possibly do to be the best person you can be, then bluntly, you're failing the world and you're failing yourself. It's unjust. But I started studying virtue, and I started looking at this because of having come across this virtuous leadership thing, and it made me think my daughters need to see me live this. They need to see me live this, and it's not fair on them if they don't. My wife needs to see me live this. And it's that sense of setting an example to the people who need to see it, so that they will start to do it in their own way and in their own circumstances and da-di-da-di-da. But it's not acceptable anymore to be mediocre. And don't get me wrong, there's lots of things I fail at, but the point is I get up and I try and learn from it and I get on again. Not everything works, but it doesn't matter as long as I am making that effort to be my best. I mean, we've talked about it. I'm inconsistent, aren't I? I know I am. I'm not by any stretch. I don't always live it, but the one thing I will say is I do my best to do so at any given moment.
Step in the direction.
Yeah. There's actually there's a Catholic saint called Saint Jose Maria, and he said, in his basic, he said loads of things actually. He's worth reading, but one of the things that's always stuck with me is, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, but his thing was, look, it doesn't matter what's happened, get up and do it again.
Like that.
And I am massively paraphrasing, much, but that was the essence of it. I felt just it though. Get up and do it again.
I felt, just that piece there. That's probably the most passionate I've kind of, from the unjust bit onwards. I felt the energy. How you feel. Failing is such a strong word, like men failing in society. But I look at it more like what we're missing. And I don't know how relative this story is. I think I've told you. We've been on loads of coaching calls. Last year, right, my son had I've always had this thing for like authority. I want to challenge it, but like in this like rebellious. But as a parent, I kind of like took a step back, and like teachers and head teachers. And there was an incident with my son, and at the time, my son was being a little fucker, right? But I kind of made a thing to make sure that although he was being a fucker, there was like a just kind of like treatment of him. And there was this particular incident, right? And what actually happened is he'd been in trouble the day before. He'd gone back into school. And something happened, and the teacher told me, and my son was adamant. He was like, "No, that didn't happen." And because of like the previous and stuff, I kind of just said like, "Bro," I kind of like just dismissed it. And I was got home, and he's cried because of the incident. And I was sitting in the car, and I was like more concerned with like, first and foremost, that the teacher thought I was a good parent. Don't know if you ever had that guilt that you want to make sure that the world know you. You never want your children, the world want to know you're a good parent. And then I just remember, and I was like, I think I actually went on a coaching call or something. And then afterwards, I was like, I missed something there. Like I missed something. And then I remember apologizing to my son. And I remember going back into the playground the next day and waiting for my opportunity to talk to the teacher, to explain to the teacher that yesterday I made a mistake. I just blindly accepted. I'm not saying you was wrong here, but now we need to revisit this and just make sure. Cut a long story short. He was still in trouble. He still done it, but that wasn't the point. My point was that I wanted to set an example to my son, about like, in many ways, but ultimately as like how important he is to me, So when you said something about what would my daughters say about me, like in the eulogy sense, that's how I felt in that moment. I felt like nothing really matters about when I'm gone, what these teachers or what these other parents think of me. What matters is what this little man, the idea that he has of me, this character that he's built up, his story, because ultimately we're just stories, right? This story he creates around me. And for me, that moment, that what you said there, I know that's a very long-winded way to say this, yeah, but I feel as though that's what men are missing. The story they're creating to...
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
Do you...
Yeah, no, I do. It's this sense of it's just this is the essence of it. There is this sense in which, and it is men in particular, I hate to say it, but it is it's a certain type of men, but it's pretty much across the board. You know, there are exceptions, obviously, where we're just here to try and have a bit of fun, and anything which detracts from that, I'm just going to push away. And what you just talked about there with your son is really powerful. There's nothing more powerful I've found as an example to my children is when I ask for their forgiveness because I've done something wrong. And it's, I mean, the response from them is remarkable. But it's more about they need to know that they need to own their mistakes.
Yeah, of course.
And that's a small part of a much bigger story about how I would like them to be and the type of people I would want them to be going forward, but also the type of person I want them to see in me. Because it's, I mean, getting back to the research, there's so much out there about the impact of fathers on children of either sex, and how what we see in you is how in 50 years' time still impacting. Some of it's subconscious, but still impacting on their ability to be happy or to live a certain way or to be able to have boundaries with people or to know what's right and all of it. And it's amazing how much that they learn in those first 10 to 15 years that just sticks and is unshiftable without massives of, I don't know, therapy or whatever it might be. But that's good and bad. So if you're not good right now, you've missed it.
Yeah.
You've missed it. You've lost it. And going back to my point about justice, you're being unjust. You are impacting them right now.
Yeah, it's a really tough conversation to have, right? Because there's a lot of unpacking to be had there. When you're telling a man that's like been told you're making a lot, well, he's making a lot of money, you can put more on that table than you, right? Yeah. How do you tell that man that like that's not enough? That's the unpacking that I'm talking about, and you come across bitter. You come across as the hater. You know, like how do you tell that man? I think that's one of the biggest issues that we have is that once you get to that point, do you even want to tell yourself another story, Andrew? Do you want to ask yourself a question of like, is this enough? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And I think certainly when I'm coaching people, if we have, I mean, being blunt, most of the people who approach me for coaching have reached a point where they know something's not quite right, partly because of the overt focus on character and virtue means that somebody who is thinking, I want a coach to help me earn another $100,000 a year isn't going to come to me. They're just not. That's fine. It probably wouldn't work with me anyway. It probably wouldn't work anyway. But there is definitely something as a coach whereby, and this is why in the first 12 weeks, I always focus entirely on who are you, not what do you want. And there's a massive power in asking questions. So to take your example of, you've got a guy here who earns $1 million versus what I earn. And actually I've got, it's a bit obvious, but it did actually work. It's as simple as, well, are you happy with that? And what is it that makes you happy with that? And just keep asking and just keep digging. But the point about asking questions is I think it feels less like an attack until the point at which they've opened up enough that you can go, well, that's not good enough. Yeah. But it's getting them to that point. And it also depends on the relationship you've got. in that first meeting I have with someone, it's very likely I'm going to be saying, you're not doing enough.
Yeah.
6 meetings down the line, well, maybe I will. But it's getting them to the point where they can see for themselves that actually they want more. What you said about ultimately what you're not going to care about whether a teacher thinks you're a good dad or not, is how they see you. Is most people, in my experience, you ask them what they want to be remembered for. No one says, I had lots of money. No one ever says that. Maybe there's one or two. I don't know. Maybe there's a few out there who that's what we. But the vast majority, no one says that, and it's because money can make life really nice, and you can have some fun with it. But ultimately, and it's really easy for me to say this, but ultimately, it doesn't matter very much. You need it, and you need a certain amount, and I get that, and it's lovely to have it. But at root, it doesn't matter very much. I could quite happily, and I've done this actually, so I know I can do it, but I could quite happily live off almost nothing if I've got my family with me. And there's a reason for that. It's because they're what's matters. How they are in 15 years' time matters to me far more than whether I'm taking them to Dubai.
Yeah. Andrew, there's actually we spoke a lot about studies and research. I'm reading a book at the moment called David and Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell, right? And a lot of what you said is true. I think there's actually research done, and it's one of the longest studies ever on happiness. And I think they say that it caps out at 75K on a household. They say at 75K, it's proven that it's diminishing returns. The effort you have to put in to make more money, you don't get happiness back. And also, you know what, Andrew, I feel there's especially coming from lower classes or benefits, right? I don't think it's about happiness per se. I think it's about escaping unhappiness.
Yeah.
I think it gets to a point where it's I just don't want to. I'm trying to get as far away from, especially because I think from a place of abundance, if you've had wealth, right, you have a different mentality from coming from the bottom and trying to and I think that's where a lot of us are at, especially working class people. Is I'm just not trying to go down that route, So I think as men as well, because there's an innate want to provide, right?
Absolutely.
And the financial bit is an elephant in the room, right? Especially how they make us feel as men. So I think when you compound that with school, the idea of what the impact money has, I think by the time you hit 25, 30, you're just you're in.
We have these ideas, so many ideas from society that bluntly screw us up, or. Maybe that's a bit unfair, but they stop a lot of what we're talking about. They stop the idea of responsibility versus just existing almost. They stop. Men find it really hard to look at themselves. And I think part of that is because of this slightly messed up idea of what it is to be a man. The whole toxic masculinity thing doesn't help. I could go on about that for ages. There's no such thing. No such thing. It's just bad behaviour and good behaviour.
Amen, by the way.
Yeah.
Amen.
You could say toxic femininity, toxic whatever.
Toxic Andrew.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, yeah. It's meaningless.
Yeah.
It's just a way of deliberately...
scrutinising a group of people.
Yeah, it's just demonising for no reason other than there's a whole purpose behind it. That's a whole different discussion. Where was I going with that? But yeah, I think I've lost my train of thought entirely. What was I talking about?
I've got my last question for you. Yeah, very time present, right? Society, men, right? What does it need more now than ever? And if you're gonna answer with Christianity, right, or Catholicism,
yeah.
I want more than that. I don't want, because that would imply someone picks up a book and problem solved, right? What do men need now more than ever?
Purpose. And now I can get into detail on that if you want.
I need more than that.
Yeah, no, I get that. But I think that is what it is at root, is that there is a lack of purpose to it. Now, I think to a large degree, that was given in the past. Yeah. That, I mean, I didn't live in it. I'm assuming based on what I've seen and read and da-di-da-di-da, but you grew up as a man, you knew broadly what your purpose was, and you could rebel against it or you go with it, but you knew it was there. And I don't think that exists anymore. Yeah, certainly not as a sort of a general thing. So I think there is a real need at an early age, ideally, to start thinking and teaching about what it is to serve, because that's ultimately what it comes down to. Any purpose needs to have that element to it, because otherwise it's not. It's not a purpose then, it's just a self-indulgent objective. And there needs to be that. It doesn't get taught in schools. It doesn't get caught in a lot of homes. And I think we get the idea of charity, for example, mixed up with service. I will all go out and pick up some litter, and that's great, fine. But it's completely disassociated from the idea of you're doing this because you're trying to serve some other people. You're doing this because you need to have a purpose which is actually going to make life better for those around you, for the world. One of the things I talk about with purpose and mission very much is, what is it that you're going to do to change the world? What is it that you're going to do to change the world? And there's this wonderful story about a guy, and I won't get into in too much detail, but in essence it was early 1900s. Bloke turns up at Marius Mignot, I think it was. Bloke turns up at the Michelin tyre factory and goes, I've got this passion of tyres, give me a job. He eventually, after lots of sort of going around different jobs within the factory, ends up in research. Now, bearing in mind this bloke was completely uneducated, the only thing driving him was he didn't even know why, he just knew for some reason he had this random passion for tyres. I mean, who has passion for tyres? Yeah. Like car tyre. Random, yeah. Anyway, and he, pretty much by himself, came up with something called the radial tyre. At that time, tyres were bursting, they were overheating and what have you. And people were starting to think that maybe the automobile wasn't going to be a goer. Mm. You know, we weren't going to have cars. And he solved it, and it became his purpose. Now, it's a random story, I get that, but that's how he changed the world. Do you know anyone who's never been in a car?
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah,
He's changed the world. Everybody has that in them if they're taught it, and we're not. We've come up with this sort of slightly motherhood and apple pie idea of charity and service and da-di-da-di-da, but it better fit a certain mould, otherwise, oh dear. And that's what's needed. That idea that everybody has a unique purpose, but it's associated with serving. And it might be that person right in front of you. It might be that homeless guy there. It might be that man over there. It might be that group over there. But you have it, and you need to live it all the time, and that needs to get taught at the earliest age. But it can be taught to an 80-year-old. Yeah. You know, everybody has it.
Beautiful. I told you I couldn't wait to get this guy on. You know, I've learned some things. I've told you I've known him over a year now. I've learned some things from him today that I will discuss, and probably bring him back on again to discuss, because I feel okay discussing. Andrew Tucker, service, individualism, Catholicism, Christianity. Please check this guy out, right? He a virtue coach.
It's a nice byline.
It's a nice byline. I will put some details up about him. Dad Pod episode 8, I think. I am ecstatic about having this guy here. It's the first time I met him in person. It won't be the last. Thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe.